I actually tend to disagree a lot with a lot of our coaches, mentors in the US, where they usually tell you you can never launch outside your market unless you've saturated your entire market, which I think is wrong, because they usually say that on the perspective of the US. I am against the idea of launch going right, left, and center from day one. I do see a lot of virtue in focusing in one market until you get it right. But as long as you feel that you're getting closer and you are seeing signs of product market fit, then I think that's a time for you to consider launch.
That was the voice of Omar Hagrass, CEO and co founder of Trella, the online trucking platform. I am your host, Ali Zwail, and this is the Startups Arabia podcast, where you learn about the Arab startups ecosystem from the best founders, investors, and operators in the region. Welcome to the Startups Arabia podcast. My guest today is Omar Hagrass. Omar is the co founder and CEO of Trella, the trucking platform. He started his life as an investment banking analyst at CI Capital and then moved to Uber, where he was the community operations manager in Cairo, but then transitioned to serve as the launch and expansion EMEA manager based in the UK, where he set up the operations for UberEATS across EMEA in Dubai, Cape Town, Riyadh, and 40 plus cities. And now, and most importantly, of course, he co founded Trella. Now, here's our interview. Welcome to the Startups Arabia podcast. My guest today is Omar Hagrass, the CEO and co founder of Trella. Trella has been blazing across the region in the last only 4 to 5 years. Their app for shipping long haul containers has launched in Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Pakistan, UAE. And I'm hoping there's much more to come soon. I'm very happy to talk to you today, Omar. Welcome.
Absolutely, my pleasure, Ali. Thank you for having me.
So maybe we can start with just in a few minutes, if you can tell me how you went into the world of startups and ended up founding Trella and what Trella does in a bit more detail.
Sure thing. So, first of all, thanks again for having me. Thanks for your time, and I hope this can add value to whoever listens to it. So, first things first, I started off my career doing investment banking. Few years down the line, quickly realized not my thing. Got what I needed from it, particularly on the finance side of things, and then joined Uber. So my story actually started with Uber, not with my professional career with investment banking. So I think my first day at Uber, I onboarded 70 or 80 drivers, and all of them on the very first day came in and thanked me personally. And this was the first time I understood. I realized, okay, there's some value that you're adding here to the community. And then I realized they were thanking me because most of them came from the tourism sector, where it wasn't necessarily booming back then when Uber launched, and a lot of them had a lot of spare time, and Uber came in to make sure that their spare time is well spent. So I stayed with Uber for 12 months in 9 months in Cairo, and then I joined our launch and expansion team for UberEATS across Europe, Middle East, and Africa, based out of London. And then I had a bunch of launches in the Middle East and Europe. And then I decided to move back to Egypt to launch Trella. But the idea of Trella started off by actually me wanting to make an impact and me wanting to make a small change in our world. And then I started looking at all the potential startups or marketplaces that could be launched. Given I've done a ride-hailing marketplace and I've done a three-dimensional marketplace with Uber Eats, I thought, okay, I like the idea of marketplaces. I think I can operate it. And then this is how we launched Trend.
Yeah, and Trella is basically a two-sided marketplace between shippers and truckers, right?
Yeah, I can give more context on what Trella is. So Trella is a marketplace that connects between shippers and suppliers. In our case, shippers are the likes of manufacturers, fast-moving good companies, shipping lines, and the supply are the likes of truck drivers, be it fleet partners or individual operators. And our marketplace connects both supply and demand together.
Right. So, I mean, that brings the classic two-sided marketplace kind of question, which is, how did you go about kickstarting things? People, the truckers to come, they want to see people to ship with their stuff, and vice versa. So, how do you solve this chicken and egg issue? How did you solve it?
So I think it really depends on the market. So a market in like in Egypt, it's oversupplied. So the marketplace really starts off by focusing on the demand side of things. In a marketplace like Saudi, it's extremely undersupplied. So the supply leads demand. If you have supply, basically people will sign with you and close contracts quickly. So and again, that's the beauty of a marketplace. Not all countries are the same. It's also the complications of a marketplace because you have a lot of iterations to go until you reach a certain milestone. So if you ask me if we are to take a case by case basis, I'd probably take the case in Saudi where really controlling and managing the supply as much as possible, making sure you have supply availability at good prices, is how you start off your flywheel. So, and the way we look at this is supply leads demand. Supply brings in more demand. Demand makes drivers more engaged. Engagement brings more demand, and so forth. And the flywheel starts kicking in. So that's basically how we thought about both.
Yep. Right. That's a beautiful way of like simplifying the question of which side to start with, which is, which one has more of a deficit, and starting there. So in your case, it was suppliers. It's a very interesting way of looking at the different markets. And I realize in your story it wasn't that easy. It included spending some time in a jail cell. It included trucks being turned over. It including many things of that sort. So maybe you can tell us about that, like first deal and first way things went.
So I'm curious to know how you knew about the jail cell piece, but it was actually a very funny story. This was our first big customers, first big shipper, and we had a load happening in the Damietta port. So I was there, me and a few other folks from the team. We kept going back and forth, and then for you to enter the port, you need a certain pass. And I was riding with one of my co-founders, Mohammed Al Garim. He was next to me, and he's been there a couple of days before I arrived. And this last day for me, I was in the car next to him. He gives me he gives me my supposedly my ID. And the ID doesn't have a picture or anything. It just says ID, or my name, and so I give the guy the name, the ID, and he looks at it and he's like, "This is not your ID." I was like, "What do you mean it's not my ID? It has my name on it." And then I look at it, it actually does not have my name. And I look at Garim, and then Garim looks at me. He's like, "Ah." Like, what do you mean? And then the guys asked asked us to stop aside. We stopped. I came down, and he asked me to go to the police station, which was located inside the port. I went there. They thought I was plagiarizing my ID or just using a different ID a fake ID to get in. That wasn't the case. Apparently, on the same day there was a big issue happening at the port, so I was just a bit unlucky at a very unlucky time where they caught me, and I stayed there for a few hours, and then I had to and then I figured my way out. But yeah, it was an interesting week. Same week we had literally all kinds of chaos. So we had accidents, we had theft attempts, we had the jail cell situation. Um, we couldn't source supply at the beginning, so at the beginning, I think we had a commitment to fulfill 50 loads a day. We couldn't fulfill more than, I think, 10 loads in the first 2 days, so it wasn't looking funny at all. But then we managed to figure things out and ramp up. So I think if you look at us at the beginning of the week and at the end of the week, it was actually a very successful week. And I usually look at this as a reflection to the startup cycle, to founders trying to build a company. It's always very, very, very tough. But if you're persistent, if you keep going, if you keep trying, if you keep innovating, and if you don't give up, and obviously not just not giving up, but not giving up, learning from your mistakes and thinking about how to solve your solutions, I- I'd I'd take a big bet that this company will eventually make it.
Yeah. So it really, I'd like to underline this fact that so many startups go to this through this kind of trial by fire situation, and these are really the situations where the company's culture and abilities are molded, and those who pass through this trial always do great things, one way or another. So let's jump maybe a bit to further down the road, maybe 1 year, 1.5 years after that. You made a very interesting decision to me, which was to acquire another startup, Truck2, which was based in Egypt. Uh, Acquisitions are normal in the startup world, but the timing of this acquisition, it was so early. It was very interesting for me to tell you, to ask you, what was the thinking behind that.
So, very good question, and I think we've got this question quite a few times here and there. But um, acquisitions are definitely normal in the startup world. However, not that early, as you mentioned. So why we've done it was mainly to Truck2 actually started off as one of our competitors. So we did have this view of shall we invest in Trella or shall we invest in Truck2? So that was one. And then second piece was Truck2 did launch 2 years before us. So they did have a very, very, very strong database for truck drivers. And then third piece was one of our competitors also wanted to acquire them, so it was also slightly defensive from our side to make sure that we are protecting um, this area as much as possible, and this is our territory, this is our turf. So we want to make sure that we're growing in Egypt systematically without a lot of um, pressure, if you want to put it that way. So I think all in all, if I go back in time, and we usually ask ourselves these questions a lot, like if you go back in time, would you make this decision, yes or no? Because we've made a lot of wrong decisions, and if I go back in time, I change a lot of the wrong decisions I've made, but this is definitely not one of them. The until today, this acquisition actually is responsible for maybe 20 to 25% of our revenues today. So I would definitely go back in time and do it for the revenues that we're generating, for the database that we've got, and for us building quite a strong defensive network for us in Egypt here.
Great. It must have been a challenge to integrate them into Trell at this early stage. I don't know how your respective teams, how the sizes of the different teams, were they equal or were they more people? How did you go about that, and the culture?
It's definitely a challenge. It's definitely a very big challenge, actually. But it really depends on what you want from the acquisition. Do you want the team? Do you want the revenue? Do you want the contracts? So it was that type of thing. We obviously, and there are cases where you want some of the team, not all of the team. You want all of the contracts, and you want the know-how. So the know-how you can get by having some of these folks. In our case, we needed some of the team, and this was fairly easy to absorb, and they blended in within the culture. So it wasn't the other way around. And we did manage to get all the contracts we wanted out of this as well. So things played fairly well for us.
Great. So another interesting decision you did, also relatively speaking, early, was Trella Store, basically a new line of business selling things like tires and batteries to your one side of your marketplace, which is the truckers, and that was also relatively speaking easy. And early. And the thought I'm having is, okay, this is a great line of business. I see the focus on it, for example, on your Facebook page, targeting Egypt, etc. At the same time, this is going to take resources, even if they're minimal, from other that you could have put in the main business. So how did you make that decision?
It depends on how you look at at at, at basically any ancillary revenue streams. If the ancillary revenue streams are going to enable the core business, then this is one that is worth investing your resources in. Obviously, knowing that the time is right and all of that. I wouldn't launch two products in the first couple of years of building a company, for example. But I think in our case, T-Store complements our offering to the truck drivers a lot. Now, truck drivers know if they come on Trella, they get access to demand, they get access to financing, and they get access to their trade tools and to buy their trade tools here and there. So, by doing that, we sort of have a closed loop ecosystem for our truck drivers, and we be like, okay, we are the marketplace of choice for truck drivers to join. And that's one. And then two is also while building Trello Story, we asked ourselves, how do you want to operate this? Do you want this to be an asset light? Do you want this to be an asset heavy, where we operate the warehouses and all of that, or we want this to be a hybrid of both? We said, one, we're solving for a better customer experience. Be this us managing. Obviously, we would like as much as possible to be less involved in the operational hassle. But if this means better customer experience, we'll do it. So we had a set of criteria and a set of outcomes that we're trying to solve for, and then we said, okay, what's the best way to get us there? And we've realized that actually a hybrid of owning the inventory and leaning on some of our partners for fulfillment was actually the best one. And the entire T-Store business is actually being operated by less than 5 or 6 people until today. So that's and it generates 10 to 15% of our revenues as well. So that's something to be proud of.
Wow, absolutely. And this type of like mentality of guerrilla kind of setup is great. The idea that a small team can do so much.
Absolutely.
And so, why did you? I mean, you're already in less than 4 to 5 years. You're already in about. You're in 4 markets. Each market is very different from the others. So Saudi Arabia, Egypt, UAE, Pakistan, they're very different from each other. They're all like they're spread across many time zones. Why did you make that decision to expand across these areas so relatively speaking quickly? You could have, I guess, there's still more market saturation to be done in Egypt or maybe in your second market of Saudi Arabia, for example.
So I guess the first question would be on how you define different, because the way we look at it is how we look at it from a load cycle perspective. So we look at the load cycle, we literally draw the load cycle as a whole, and then we look at our customer persona. So we look on the shipper side and we look on the carrier side, and then we try understanding, does this product with those personas fit in this market? So can this product fit in this market, and can we find those exact personas on those markets? So that's how I would basically put it. If we look at the GCC in general, UAE and Saudi, I actually do consider both of them as sort of a unit, especially that if you're operating cross borders here and there. So the cross borders that we operate in Saudi, we plan on launching new countries or new cities in Jordan, in Oman, in Kuwait, in Lebanon. So like there is a plan to actually grow the cross-border function in the GCC, and that's something that is currently happening. If you look at what type of product you want to offer there, maybe some of these questions would answer the question of how different those markets are from each other. For us, we operate the cross-border function as a unit, so that's one. We look at the customer persona. So the customer persona, for example, in between Egypt and Pakistan is almost the same. independent operators in Egypt, independent operators in Pakistan. Sometimes you have fleet partners or brokers in between both the shipper and the independent operator, which is exactly the same between Egypt and Saudi. The shippers are more or less the same across all our markets, so that's one thing. And then I think there's one thing as well that I actually tend to disagree a lot with a lot of our coaches, mentors in the US, where they usually tell you you can never launch outside your market unless you've saturated your entire market, which I think is wrong, because they usually say that on the perspective of the US. So it's like you're going to Uber, who started off in San Francisco, and you're telling Uber you cannot launch outside of San Francisco uh, before you figured it out in San Francisco. And that while that has not been the case actually. I think Uber went to San Francisco, went to New York, went to some of the big cities before not necessarily when they've reached full MVP. Like I think full product market fit. I think once they've seen good signs or positive signs towards this product market fit, they actually started greenlighting and launching a bunch of cities. So in our case, we also look at it that way. I am against the idea of launch and going right, left, and center from day one. I do see a lot of virtue in focusing in one market until you get it right. But as long as you feel that you're getting closer and you are seeing signs of product market fit, then I think that's a time for you to consider launch.
Great. Yeah, and I think that that deep understanding of your customer and their needs is so important in, their need for cross border shipments, etc. It just drives your your direction, and that's the right way to drive your direction. So when raising your last round, it was a total of $42 million, and 15 million of it was venture debt. So how did you decide that to raise debt in addition to equity?
So I think a big mistake a lot of startups actually do in the region is that they do not leverage venture debt. I think venture debt is a great tool to boost your runway with less dilution, enables you to have more cash on hand, enables you, like, it's a bunch of things, enables you to enter into new ventures, enables you to leverage your balance sheet. Like, there's a lot of really positive things of having debt um, in parallel to your fundraise. I was speaking to an investor the other week, and I think he mentioned something around the line, like, now we're making it sort of mandatory. And he said sort of because obviously they cannot push their companies to do things they don't want. But he's like, we're making it sort of mandatory for startups to raise debt with their venture, with their fundraiser, because it's good. The one disclaimer though is that if you do not have a strong treasury guy or a strong CFO or a strong finance person who can manage the fund and allocate the receivables or the payables in a healthy manner, I would not advise for venture debt. Venture debt is quite meticulous. The process is quite long, and even when after you like get the debt itself, the operational hassle and hurdle and integrations that you need to do with your lender is quite a hassle. So I, as much as I vouch for it, I think people or startups need to be ready for it. It's because they don't get the same upside as an equity investor, so they are going to be a little bit more focused on the downside. They're trying to protect themselves from any downside, basically, versus an equity investor who's solving for grow and then as for growth, and then as you grow, the company's valuation is going to go up, and then there's an upside for them as well. So that's one thing. The other thing is, I generally think venture debt, besides obviously increasing your runway, etc., and all of that, I generally see venture debt as a tool to make you more disciplined, because when you have venture debt, your lenders are going to take enough protections to make sure that this company um, doesn't necessarily go bust for as long as the line is active, and if it does, then they have room for them to protect their downside. So I do see a lot of virtue in this also making you more disciplined as you manage receivables and payables as well. It depends on what type of debt you've taken. And I think lastly, venture debt is fairly new to the region, and not a lot of people have done it. I think I'm not sure about that. It's just I think we were one of the first, if not the first, to tap into venture debt. And if we go back in time, we'll do it again. And we're actually doing we're looking at a few other deals as we speak, venture debt. So it's I'd go for it.
Interesting. So it's a great way to increase your runway without dilution, too much dilution. But it's something that you have to really calculate very well, and you make sure you have the structures to handle and manage this situation. Otherwise, it's better not to do it.
Aligned.
Um, Also, in this round, one of the lead investors, there were two lead investors, but one of them was Maersk Ventures, and Maersk is obviously in the same industry, shipping at large, shipping. I suppose they also deal with with Trella as a kind of one of your customers. But when you get an investor in who is in the same industry, I mean, there are benefits to this, but there are also potentially risks to that. So how did you make that decision to bring in a corporate VC from the same industry, and how are you thinking of that?
I wish I can tell you I was very sophisticated with my search and all of that, but that wasn't the case. As with any fundraise, you're basically treating it as a funnel. You try as much as possible to increase your top of funnel so that you can, as much as possible, have a big success rate. And part of this funnel happens to be Merge growth. In fact, actually, Merge growth came after we did receive a term sheet from two term sheets, actually, from one investor who backed out last minute and from another investor who actually did co-join or co-led the round with Maersk. If you look into this as a funnel and try to look at the conversion rates as well between first investor, like literally I have a CRM for investors where it says first touch point, second touch point, follow up, closed one, like it's literally a sales funnel. And every funnel of these you keep losing, churning some customers. Some of them you lose,
Yep.
some of them don't respond, etc., etc. So with Maersk, they actually came in late. They came in as a referral from one of our investors, and this was a bit late after we did receive the term sheet, and they finished everything, due diligence, speaking to us, everything in less than 10 days. So if we look back at it, and if we look back into to this in a way that is how you build your fundraise, we usually target to have 400 to 500 investors to talk to, and from those 400 to 500 investors, if you take a 1 to 2% success rate, maybe 5 to 10 of them are gonna join your cap table. Uh, Today, I would argue less than 1% would do. I would say 1 to 5 of them are going to join your cap table these days, and I guess that's fine. If you wanna be more sophisticated about it, then you probably need to speak to a
Yep.
thousand investors rather than 500 investors to be able to get there.
Yeah. But and you're not worried that potential like conflicts with Maersk at some point, or them because of their being in the shipping industry, or having maybe a position to how can I put it, like influence any exit as choices for you in the future.
So two things. One, we don't have an exclusive agreement by any chance, by any means. So that's one thing to give us more comfort. And then the second piece, which I think is also important, is why would you fear that if you don't have a non and if it's non-exclusive, you don't have any exclusivity in place. You don't necessarily. It's not something basically to be afraid of. In fact, they can do it with or without you if that's the case, and you can do it with or without them as well if that's the case. So, I no. The short answer is as long as you're protecting yourself with the contract, you shouldn't be afraid.
Right. So, I mean, going back to the fundraise, the headline, $42 million raise, etc. Some people or some founders, they're like, when I raise $42 million, it's going to be game over. I'm going to be able to. I've done it. I've reached the end point. I can relax and focus on operation and things like that. What would you tell these people?
Uh, so I think I'll look at it how I looked at it when we closed the round. When we closed the round, I by all means didn't see this as we've done it and that's it, bye bye. No, we've actually looked at it as we're just getting started. We're continuing on our mission. We're continuing to build. The second piece is people. It really depends. I know SaaS companies who did one raise at $5 million and now they're valued at multi-billion dollars, and that's it. They don't need to raise money. They were smart enough to grow the company super fast without the need to raise a single dime, or maybe without the need to raise post their seed round. um, in our case, I think this is a capital intensive business with heavy working capital requirements. So I do see us raising rounds as we go, but it depends on really how you look at rounds. Stripe is still raising rounds at $100 billion valuation. I mean, that was 6 months ago. Now I think the valuation is being revised, but Stripe was raising money at $1 billion. Did Stripe really need this money to raise? No, they raised it for mergers, acquisitions. Like, they were quite diligent with why they raised the money. I think the press release also mentioned a few things here and there. So no, it really depends on why are you raising the money. You can keep raising your money as long as you go. I'm not a fan of fundraising, by the way. Like, I think if you can fundraise less and focus on business and operations and bring your company to a place where it can scale and generate free cash flows, that's obviously the most ideal scenario. We're not there yet. I think we need another year or two to be able to
Yeah.
do that, and within that period, we'll probably have another raise.
Yeah. Um, and also, I mean, you have competitors in the region. I believe one of them recently raised $96 million Series B in Saudi, and this must put on the pressure a bit. So, how do you see competition and differentiation in the region for this market?
So with without any flashy statements, I think a big problem is if a lot of people think of competition raising money as a pressure, because this basically leads to uncontrollable burn, uncontrollable wrong tactics here and there to win the game. When a lot of people not when actually, if you have a roadmap and you want to focus on what you're building and you want to focus on the right inputs that would eventually allow you to outgrow your competitions by 10 times, is just trust the process, trust what you build, have this urgency to deliver this on time, have this urgency to create alignment between teams. And that's what matters more. I do see a lot of companies following competition blindly, and I think this is wrong. I think this is very, very wrong. Actually, it could create havoc in one way or another. In our case, no, we don't see competition. In fact, we actually see competition raising money as something very positive because they educate the market with us, especially the markets where we're not operational. So we see this as something very positive. Do we want to compete with them? Are we aggressive? 100%. We're very aggressive. We'll compete with them. We'll eventually win. Uh, but we need to have this roadmap, trust the process, trust that if you continue going that way, we'll be able to eventually we have this thing internally at Trella where we say the long haul is ours. So we're in this for the long haul. We're in this to build the right solution to solve the right problem, and that's
Great,
how we'll take it from there.
great. So, let me dig into the business model for Trella a little bit. How do you charge shippers? How do you contract truckers? What's your take rate? Who do you take it from? Can you tell me more about that?
Basically, it's think of Trella as an Amazon for loads. We buy the loads from the shippers. So let's say we'll give a very random name, Maersk. We buy the loads from Maersk and we sell those loads to truck drivers. And the difference between the prices that we bought it with and the prices that we sold it with is basically the spread or our margin. So we buy the load for $100 from 100 EGP from Maersk, we sell it for 90 EGP, and then we have 10%. This is our take rates. It's as simple as that.
Right. So that's your current business model. Is that how you started with it, or did this evolve?
No, that's how it started from day one.
Yeah. So I have so many questions for you, but you have a hard stop. I'm gonna start. I'm gonna have to jump to some of my later questions that I want to cover. I've noticed that you guys at Trella, you have some company values that are very heavily communicated both internally and externally, and that you seem to focus on building a strong culture, and that it seems to have started quite early in Trella's journey. So, can you tell me more about that? Why you started so early? You know how you came up with the values you came up with, and tell me more about that. And what's important about culture in a startup?
100%. So, and I think I like this question a lot because it's something that I care about a lot as well. So, a lot of people usually look at culture as and look at the nice culture as a culture where you can have, I don't know, sushi for lunch, or you can have a fuse wall at the office, or whatever, like a lot of entertainment as part of a nice culture. When I think this is wrong, actually, I think a nice culture is a culture that is determined to win and have this constant nag and constant urgency to work with a team to be able to achieve the company's mission and goal. And one of the things, actually, I think that help us retain our talent most in Trella is not not that we pay highest. In fact, we don't. Not that we have the most amazing business model in the world. Some people would say yes, this is a great model, but others as well say no. But they are still part of this company because they want to solve the problem. And I think culture is what made us where we are now. I can comfortably say we have the best team any startup would want to have in this part of the world, in this region, not just Egypt. And that's something we're very proud of. The reason why these people stick around is not because, and we've been through some very, very hard times. With the hard times we've been, people are still sticking around. So that's one thing I'm very grateful for. And that's one thing, if I go back in time, again, we'll invest in culture, we'll invest in setting up the values. On the values piece itself, I think we started off the values exercise in 2021. So that was, yeah, that was like a couple of year, a year and a half after we started, and we were absolutely focused to make sure that we're getting this right. And we have 7 values that we live by. One thing that I would make sure to also make this very clear is that I am, as much as I love all our values, I think some of them are being misused, and I think some of them. So, as an example, we have a value. One of our values is better done than perfect. And you can, at the beginning, we started seeing a lot of people maybe reducing the quality of work for the sake of getting things done, and that's not necessarily what like better done than perfect means. Better done than perfect means, yes, you can execute, you can get things done fast in good quality. You don't have to, it doesn't need to, you don't need to be an artist or a painter to show us your work. Just make sure that it's delivered in a good way so that whoever is reading it can comfortably give you feedback and have this productive back and forth. Um, we are going through an exercise in Q2 to actually go through our values again, make sure that we are having these in a place where it's in good shape. It's not being misused. It's actually adding the value that we wanted to be added. And there's no we actually see ourselves adding more values as we grow. And I think a lot of the companies, the big companies out there, I think Netflix, for example, they added one of their values 10 years or 15 years after the company uh, have been built, and that's fine. And the one they added was really on culture difference and inclusion and all of that. And this is really when they started launching and growing way outside the US.
Yep. I I really agree with all you've said, and sometimes also companies after a while they remove values, like when Facebook removed move fast and break things because they were like handling the the social networking for 2 billion people, and they couldn't really break things that as simply as it was when they started, and they needed to move much faster. So I mean that aspect is also there, and always evolving the values. I totally agree is so important. And okay, I mean, the next question is kind of a personal one, or as, from what I understand, you used to play jujitsu, and I wanted to ask you, what is in common between being a karate player and being a startup founder?
So, amazing question again. I actually reflect on this question a lot. I would maybe, if I may, I would tweak the question a little bit. What's in common between uh, being a startup founder and being an athlete in general? I think sports teaches teaches you a lot of things. The top three things sports teaches you is one, um being constantly under stress, under pressure, how this basically makes you stronger, enables this grit, this perseverance to keep going no matter what the situation is. Two, it allows you to make decisions fast, especially if you're in one of those games or tennis, water polo, football, or handball, like things that requires you to make quick decisions fast. You have this mental model being formed as you go. And then three, it actually allows you to be a team player, even if it's an individual sport, by the way. Jiu-jitsu is an individual sport, but it allows you to care about your team, make sure to train them before their competitions, make sure to be there where they compete and all of that. So all of this is something that I cherish a lot about sports. I'm big on sports. I'll continue doing sports for the rest of my life, I hope. And I generally think it's important for everyone to do sports.
Great. Um, I have so many more questions to you about so many details, but our time is running out, so I'm going to go into the quick fire questions. Basically, a quick question, and if you can, and a quick reply, and then we can wrap up. So the first one is, what book or books do you like to recommend to others?
Uh, I mean, there's a lot of books. I would actually maybe refer some books that are not necessarily related to business. I think they also help a lot. Um, So I have a list of some of the books. So maybe on building habits and all of that, you have Atomic Habits and The Power of Habit. Both of them are really good. On biographies, I would recommend Open for Andre Agassi. So it's a sports biography, but it's really 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 good. I would recommend Da Vinci by Walter Isaacson. This too is really good. It shows you how these uh, l- really, really legendary icons went through their own creative battle back and forth to think through things. On memoirs, I would recommend uh, When Breath Becomes Air. This is by far my favorite book ever. It's about a doctor who's 36 years old and got diagnosed by terminal cancer. So he's writing his last year or two. He's been literally documenting them. It's a very interesting topic to understand death and all of that, but it's also it also is touching. Um, what else? I mean, I have a bunch of them behind me on politics. Oh yeah, obviously. On I think philosophy is very interesting. Anti-fragile is a very. I'm not very good at reading philosophy books. I'm still trying to teach myself. I'm actually very slow, but anti-fragile is one of them, and meditations is also a good one.
Great.
So
So another question is, I mean, how do you unwind and how do you stay energized with all the stress?
I do a lot of sports. I'm very very close to my routine. So I sleep very early. I wake up very early. I've been doing that for the good 4 or 5 years now. So I'm going to continue doing that. I think sports managed to also help me manage stress, and then I think periodic time off is also very important. There you need to shut down completely every 2 to 3 months for a few days and then come get back at it. So I try to do all three um, quite religiously.
Yeah, cool. And if we have, who would you suggest as guests on our podcast?
I would suggest uh, from the ecosystem in Egypt or in the region in general.
Most people who somehow are touching the region. So whether founders or VCs, just the first two or three names that come to mind.
I would recommend Ahmed Hamouda from Thunder. I would recommend Tino Waked and Omar Hasib from Sawa. It's a fintech B2B fintech coming up co- uh, coming to life in a few weeks. I would recommend Bilal Megarbel from Maxab. I think all three are from different stages, so that would help the audience a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'd like to close the podcast on a note of gratitude. So um, can you tell us about a gift someone has given you that has really affected your life in a positive way?
I don't often get a lot of gifts except for like very my wife probably pampers me with the gifts and my close friends, but generally speaking, I think the best gift I've received um, was from my parents, and it wasn't necessarily a gift per se. Uh, it could have been a fishing trip. It could have been a trip where we traveled all together somewhere around. But the reason why I cherish this gift a lot is because every time I went on with my parents, I did learn something new. It shaped who I am today, and it shaped who how I think, and those times with my parents traveling were the times where we managed to get as much time talking about things. So I cherish the time spent with my parents as much as possible as the best gift I've received.
That's a great note to end on, Omar. Thank you very much for your time and hope to have you on again soon.
Thank you, Ali, and thank you, everyone. It was a real pleasure to be around, and I hope this added some value to everyone. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you for listening to this episode of Startups Arabia podcast. If there was something you really liked about what the guest said today, reach out to them on social media and tell them what you liked. And of course, if you haven't subscribed yet, what are you waiting for? You don't want to miss any of our great upcoming episodes. Also, please rate us and give us comments on our social media accounts so that we know how to improve. And also tell us what you like. We don't mind hearing that either. Until next time, this was your host, Ali Zwail.